Extinction Rebellion protesters, 8 of whom have now been arrested, doused the Treasury yesterday with 2,000 litres of fake blood. Well, they were trying to. They got some fake blood. They turned up in an old diesel engine, fire engine, of course, with the water supply coming out of the hose. Didn't realise, obviously, because they've probably never done a proper day's work in their lives, that actually those hose pipes are really quite powerful when there's a full jet of water coming out of them. So while the first bit of fake blood, the red water, hit the Treasury building, the stunt backfired very quickly when they lost control of the hose, and it pumped red dye all over pretty much everywhere, including the actual protesters themselves. Well, as I say, arrests have been forthcoming, but now we hear that actually there are going to be far more serious protests planned over the next couple of weeks. More than 20,000 Extinction Rebellion campaigners are threatening to paralyse central London next week. A fortnight of disruption. They want to converge on London City Airport, blockade Smithfield Meat Market, and shut roads around Westminster from Monday. They also perhaps hoping to bring London to a standstill around the time of the Queen's speech, due now for the 14th of October. Well, let's talk about all of this with Zach Bolansky, who's an activist with Extinction Rebellion. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Judith. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, well, thanks for coming on. I say we always like to talk to people we don't necessarily agree with, to hear all sides of the debate. Tell me about this demonstration yesterday. What was the purpose of taking an old diesel engine, fire engine, to the outside of the Treasury in London and spraying it with 2,000 litres of fake blood?
I mean, I think the biggest purpose is the biggest problem with climate change is human activity. But actually, the bigger problem right now in the UK is human inaction. So the fact we're not doing anything. The IPCC, who is the gold standard from the UN, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, said we've got 12 years left to do something about this. We're currently at 1 degree warming since the Industrial Revolution. There's a risk that we'll get to 1.5, which is going to be pretty disastrous, and there'll be irreversible losses at 2 degrees. So a bit of paint on the building seemed like very little compared to kind of the existential crisis we could be facing.
OK, well, I mean, I'm going to disagree with you on some of these things in terms of existential crisis. And the IPCC, they weren't actually saying there were 12 years left. They were talking about a deadline in 2030. Well, not a deadline. They're saying that in 2030, this is what could happen. And if this worst case scenario did happen, this is what happened. They didn't actually say we've got 12 years left to act. That's often misquoted. But
I mean, can I just say, Julia, that some of this isn't debatable. 97% of scientists say climate change is a real present danger.
Zach, that's not the argument.
680 million people around the world live in low-lying areas. But right now they're threatened by... Yes?
Zach, we're not having that conversation, OK? I'm just pointing out that you are misquoting the IPCC. I like to deal with facts on this show.
Can I just say with respect, though, the facts on climate change often aren't quoted properly. Well, and the fact that this is happening right now...
Out that,
I shouldn't have even said in 12 years, because this is happening right now across the world. People live in low-lying areas.
Yes, they do.
With cyclical worlds. There's floods. Bangladesh will be underwater.
Bangladesh has had floods since time immemorial. It's basically very low-lying land. OK, I'm just pointing out that wasn't because you said the biggest problem is we're not doing anything. The reality is, though, that the British government, whether you like it or not, and I don't like a lot of what they're doing on this front, they have actually done far more than pretty much any other major Western government in terms of tackling this. They've now got an official policy, one with which I completely disagree, that by 2050 we'll move to we'll have zero net carbon emissions. Huge action has been taken to reduce our carbon emissions in recent years, and that has all been well and good. We've moved to a lot more renewable energy. When you say that we're not doing anything, again, that is factually untrue.
So I think there's two things to talk about there. The first of all, what we were just talking about, more than half of our emissions have occurred since the Industrial Revolution. Since the Industrial Revolution have occurred since 1988. So actually, you say that Bangladesh has been underwater for a long time. Things are getting considerably worse, and it's happening rapidly. And the past
that's not why Bangladesh. That's not. No. Sorry, you keep citing Bangladesh. That is not the reason why Bangladesh has major flooding across huge swathes of its land. That is simply not the case. That's simply not. I just asked you about why you think. Why I simply made that you said something that was factually untrue. You said the biggest problem is we're not doing anything. So the demonstration outside the Treasury, the point of that was to demonstrate that you don't believe that the government is doing enough. I've just pointed out to you that they have done more than pretty much any Western government. Are you saying then they're not doing enough, or are you saying that we're not doing anything? Which is it? Because we're not doing anything is provably factually untrue.
Well, I mean, it's partly...
Is it or is it not?
It's about how you look at these stats, isn't it? So, for instance, China gets often quoted, why aren't you talking to China? But China have actually initiated a massive action plan that we haven't, and we are outsourcing.
Have they?
a lot of our carbon emissions to China. And that's the problem here, is a lot of it is we're just pushing the problem elsewhere. And of course, climate change doesn't respect, continental borders. It's a problem for the entire world.
Yeah, absolutely. Would it be possible for you to direct your answer at any point to one of my questions? When you say the British government isn't doing anything, do you accept that, yes, people can read the figures in different ways, and I absolutely agree, yes, we ship a lot. The First World definitely does this. This was, all of the climate change agreements have basically just enabled the First World to ship their problem overseas. I completely accept that. But to say we're not doing anything and to throw 2,000 litres of fake blood on a building of a government saying we're not doing anything, that is factually untrue. Do you accept that?
I mean, if we want to play semantics, I can reword the statement so we're not doing enough. But
do you understand that that's not semantics? Saying we're not doing anything and you think the government's not doing enough are not the same statement at all.
I mean, you could argue that turning up in Parliament and talking about it, we're doing something. But I think most of the
that's not what I mean by them doing anything.
Lip service is not enough.
But you are aware that our carbon emissions have gone down massively in recent years, and there's been a massive move to renewable energy.
We've taken aviation out of the equation, and also, as I say, we're outsourcing a lot of our carbon emissions. We're sending things to landfill.
But you accept that something is being done. OK, so, but tell me why you think these sort of protests work, because it seems to me that there's quite a lot of sort of people will pay lip service to this in the public and will say, well, these people mean well and they're worried about the climate and things. But actually, when people, can't get about their capital city, and it's these protests happening in other cities now as well, and feel they're being disrupted, going about their lawful business, driving their cars, getting on planes, going on a holiday, whatever it is, they'll feel more and more aggrieved and perhaps not sympathetic. Do you not think that if your cause is so valid and you've got so much fact behind it and people are genuinely concerned about it and want action, it would be better for you to stand for election, to campaign, to lobby Parliament in a more professional way, in a democracy, rather than just trying to destroy property and stop other people going about their lawful business? Would that not be the right way to go about making your point and trying to change policy?
I think the last few months have shown us that we have a massively broken democratic system. We have an unfair voting system of first past the post. We're missing proportional representation where seats would actually, match votes. And I think under this broken democratic system, it's incumbent on everyone to make sure that we're stepping up. I take civil disobedience really seriously, but actually at a point where a government is not doing enough, granted, it's not that they're not doing anything, but they're not doing enough, and I concede that point. We need to make sure that actually we're taking action into our own hands.
OK, but you say taking action in your own hands. Now, taking action in your own hands, if you live in a country where you don't have the ballot box, is one thing. But when you do have the ballot box, you say it's not a fair system. First past the post is a very common system of election. You can campaign, as other parties have done over the years, to get that election system changed. And many parties may actually be willing to agree to that in coming years. But you do have the ability to change policy. You do have the ability to stand at elections. The European European Parliament elections happened only in May, and as you'll know, the Green Party did okay, but and they get representation on that basis. Why do you not simply stand for election on behalf of Extinction Rebellion and make your arguments to the British people and get them on side, rather than using protests that damages property and puts ordinary law-abiding citizens just going about their daily business, putting their noses out of joint?
So the obvious thing to say is the Green Party did more than okay. They had their best elections in history. But actually,
and what percentage did they get?
That I can't remember straight offhand, but that was they got 7 Green MEPs across the UK, and that's the most they've ever had. But that was under a proportional representation system. That's exactly what I'm saying. You said first past the post is a very popular system.
I didn't say it was a popular system. I said it was a perfectly normal system.
Well, we say normal. There's only 6 parties that support it in Europe. 4 of them are far right. One of them's the Conservative Party, and one of them happens to be the Labour Party. And shame on them, because it's a bit like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. They recognise that in the past, it's really supported their particular cause. But actually what it means is a culture of safe seats, lack of accountability from politicians. And I think, it's not going to be too much of a push to say to people that politicians aren't doing their job. Okay. They're not representing.
Okay, so but basically you're saying that because we can't get enough MEPs or MPs elected, we're not going to go down the democratic route. We're going to just go down the disruptive route, protest route, the damaging public property route, because we want everyone to listen to what we have to say. Do you really think that that's going to fly for very long in this country?
With respect, I didn't say that. I don't think it's that didactic. I think you can both go down the democratic route, and in fact, I am standing for Parliament, but also you can go down the route of civil disobedience. It's not one or the other. I think you can go down both routes. And I think we've already shown that by going down the civil disobedience route and the protesting route, we've already started to make Parliament at least talk about it. As we know,
I mean,
they declared a climate
that's
emergency.
my worry, because I'm not entirely sure that MPs should be swayed by the number of people who are on the streets causing disruption to people rather than by the arguments. But that's just, personal opinion. Zach Polanski, interesting to debate with you. Really appreciate you coming on the show as an activist with Extinction Rebellion.